Hi, I'm Alisha Berger, the program manager for book publishing here at Room to Read. And I actually came to Room to Read about 6 months ago. I had been working for a number of big publishing houses in New York, Simon & Schuster, DK, most recently Penguin. I looked at one of the boards and I saw this job, and it was like, located in San Francisco, California, Global Program Officer for Book Publishing. And I thought, global book publishing? San Francisco? What's that? And just started laughing when I read about the job, where I'd be helping create books in 10 countries around the world in local languages. And for kids who have no books, I think that's one of the most amazing things about working here, is that when you're in the general publishing industry in the US, you're competing constantly to make your books the best out of a crop of really wonderful books. So many books published every year. Kids have such a wealth of choice. The libraries in one child's room here are equivalent, sometimes even more, than we can provide at some libraries in the developing world. And it's really amazing to think about being able to create books for kids who just wouldn't have the opportunity to read in their own language otherwise. And to know the kinds of things our teams are up against, I feel every book is like a small miracle that it's happened at all. That with the production challenges, with the design challenges, with the equipment challenges, and learning to educate people about how to make a picture book. That's something that doesn't exist in other places in the world. It's an art form that started here, and it's a whole different way to tell a story that's half with pictures, half with text. So when we're teaching people to do that at the same time that we're up against all these other challenges in very, very short time frames. We make books in about 6 months here. In the publishing industry, you would have 2 to 3 years to create a book. So the kinds of things that we're doing for every book that you see are so incredible. And when I was recently in Zambia, and I was thinking, what are the things I can do? These books are pretty small. I'd like to make them bigger. It would be easier for the children to read. All these things that are in my mind. And I watched a 5-year-old girl read this book to me. She was so excited. It was one of the only 4 books in her language on the entire shelf. And I just felt so humbled. I thought, you know what? This is incredible. We're providing books to someone who otherwise would have no books at all. There's a lot of things going on there that I can look at with my critical publishing eye, and in the end, none of that matters when you have a book that is still colorful and bright and tells a story that's relevant, that's appropriate, and that is just exciting and engaging for the child reading it. So I feel pretty lucky to do what I do. Talk a little bit about the thought that went into this book. So sometimes when you read a book, hopefully your experience is that it's so fun and you really enjoy it, that you laugh, that you like the pictures. That's the kind of experience we want kids to have, and of course to be able to read the story. So one of the first things we think about, of course, is how many words are on a page. So you'll notice, for instance here, that you have very few words on a page. So a child coming to this book who's just learning to read is not going to be intimidated by too much text. So in all of our different languages, we have developed certain standards to think about who the child is who's reading it, what their reading level might be, and then what kinds of vocabulary and what number of words might be easiest for them to read. So we think about that with all of our books, with every page, with every story. So with this story in particular, one of the things we've really noticed across the world is that the easiest stories for authors to think up are what we call slice of life stories. So they're stories about things that you might see going on in a village all the time. So one of the things we're trying to do is get authors to think a little bit more imaginatively, to think about not just using humans as characters, but other creatures or animals that might be relevant in that culture. So this book came out of Vietnam, and one of the animals that the author thought of using was, a dragon. That's really relevant in our culture. Kids would be interested in it. And what about a cricket? So this is kind of an unlikely friend story. Sometimes we would challenge authors to think, who are 2 unlikely animal friends? And could you think about a story between these 2 friends? So this story is just that, an unlikely friendship between a dragon and a cricket. So another challenge that we have in a story is the structure. So every story you want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or it's not a terribly satisfying story. So sometimes we help authors consider what is the middle of the story. That's often the hardest thing. It's It's the place where you've introduced the situation and you haven't gotten to the finale, you haven't gotten to the satisfying ending yet, but what's going to happen in the middle to get you there? So one of the techniques that our program manager in Southeast Asia has been trying out is this idea of a travelogue. So in this story, you'll notice Dragon has a problem. He can't sleep, and he thinks, oh, I'll take Cricket around the world. So not only do kids get to learn about different places in the world and see some really interesting illustrations of a jungle, which might be pretty common in Vietnam, but also the Sphinx, which of course is not in Vietnam, and the penguins, which are not in Vietnam either. So this is a really fun idea to be able to bring in a lot of different stuff and learn about different places and kind of go through the world and also have a successful middle to a story that feels like it's building, that feels interesting. So by the time Dragon gets home, we'll notice he's tired Cricket out, and he's tired himself out, and he's so tired he finally falls asleep himself. And what finally happens? He snores so loud that Cricket wakes up, and now Cricket can't sleep. So this is what we call a surprise ending, or a funny ending. And actually, that's something you really have to think about when you're setting up a story, and it's something kids absolutely love. In our reader preferences study, we've really seen that humor is something that just kids all over the world really respond to. I don't think that surprises anyone, but the end of this story is particularly funny. So kids really, really enjoy that. And of course, the adults reading with them enjoy it too, which is a nice addition. And the last thing I think is really wonderful about this story is the level of detail in the illustrations. So we're often talking about how pictures tell half the story in a picture book. And sometimes they tell new information, different information, more information. So there's a whole other story going on in the pictures in this story beyond the story that you're reading about Cricket and Dragon. So you'll notice there's these funny things kind of floating around. Cricket almost floats when he sleeps. There's a funny little illustration up here, a conversation going on in a picture. There's a floating robot toy, floating pencils. So a lot of fun things for kids to look at and explore when they're reading the book. And that's something that gives a picture book, that makes it so special, and that gives it another level, a reason to go back to it, a reason to read it again, and really a reason for kids to engage when they're just learning to read. And it might be hard sometimes to look at all those words and read all those words. Well, if they want to, they can just go through and look at the pictures and read the pictures. So that's something I think this book does really successfully. This is the story of Cricket and Dragon. One day, Cricket comes to visit Dragon. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" says Cricket. Cricket stays over that night. "I'm really tired. Don't wake me up, okay?" "Okay," says Dragon to Cricket. Cricket starts to snore. Dragon can't sleep. Read, 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 read. That's Cricket snoring. Dragon keeps tossing and turning. Finally, Dragon decides to take Cricket outside. The whole city is awakened by Cricket snoring. "So noisy," say the people in the houses. The whole jungle is awakened by Cricket snoring. "So noisy," says the rhinoceros. "So noisy," says the tiger. The ocean is awakened too. "Why so noisy?" say the shark and the octopus. And the Sphinx is awakened. "Why so noisy?" says the camel. And the penguins are awakened as well. "Why so noisy?" they say. Late that night, after traveling all around the world, Dragon brings Cricket back home. Dragon places Cricket back to his bed, but Cricket keeps snoring. Too tired, Dragon falls asleep right away. Dragon snores loudly, waking Cricket up. "I can't sleep," says Cricket.